Perfect Wisdom, with the divisions of the Abhishamailamkara. Translated by EdwardConze 1904–1979. University of California Press, Berkeley, Los Angeles, London. Chapter 62. The Supreme Attainment. Subhuti. How, O Lord, does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of morality, acquire the perfection of giving? The Lord. Here the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of morality, does not adhere by any of his bodily, vocal, or mental engagements to the level of the disciples and pratyekabuddhas. When he stands in this perfection of morality, he does not rob beings of life, does not take what is not given, to, does not have false views. When he has stood in that perfection of morality, then any gift which he gives, whether it be food to those who want food, drink to those who want drink, and likewise cars, clothes, flowers, garlands, perfumes, ointments, lodgings, asylum, livelihood, and services to those who want them. In short, all kinds of things useful to humans, that gift he makes common to all beings and dedicates it to full enlightenment, but not to the level of the disciples and pratyekabuddhas. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of morality, acquire the perfection of patience? The Lord. Here, the bodhisattva, the great being, who has stood in the perfection of morality, when all beings cut off all his limbs, never gets angry or feels ill will, but just thinks to himself, how good it is that this should have happened to me. For through my renunciation of this stinking body I shall win the heavenly, adamantine body of a Tathagata. Single quote. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of morality, acquire the perfection of vigor? The Lord. Here the bodhisattva, the great being, does not relax his physical and mental vigor, and he is determined that he will rescue all beings from samsara, and establish them in the deathless element. Single quote. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of morality, acquire the perfection of concentration? The Lord. When the bodhisattva, the great being, enters on the trances, he does not hang on to the level of the disciple or pratyekabuddhas, but thinks to himself that, having stood here in the perfection of concentration, I should liberate all beings from samsara. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of morality, acquire the perfection of wisdom? The Lord. Here the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of morality, does not see any dharma as conditioned or unconditioned. He does not see existence as conditioned or non-existence as unconditioned. He does not see the sign as conditioned or the signless as unconditioned. He does not review the beingness or non-beingness of any dharma, except in such a way that he does not transgress against the suchness of all dharmas. And through that perfection of wisdom and skill in means he does not fall on the level of a disciple or pratyekabuddha. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of patience, acquire the perfection of giving? The Lord. As the bodhisattva, from the first thought of enlightenment onwards and up to his being seated on the terrace of enlightenment, gives gifts, if all beings should abuse and revile him, and cut him limb from limb, still, firmly established in the perfection of patience, he thinks to himself, I should give to these beings, not should I not give gifts. To those who want food he gives food. Having made these wholesome roots common to all beings, he dedicates them to the knowledge of all modes, but in such a way that the triple intellectual act does not take place, i.e., concerning him who dedicates, that which dedicates, that whereto it is dedicated. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of patience, acquire the perfection of morality? The Lord. Here the bodhisattva, the great being, beginning with the first thought of enlightenment, until he is seated on the terrace of enlightenment, does not rob any being of life, does not take what is not given. 2. He has no false views, and his thought does not stride forth to the level of the disciples or pratyekabuddhas. And he makes these wholesome roots common to all beings and dedicates them to full enlightenment, as before. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of patience, acquire the perfection of vigor? The Lord. Here the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of patience, generates vigor in this manner. I will travel for 1 mile, for 100 miles, or up to a distance of thousands of kotis of world systems for the sake of one single being whom I could establish in the art of taking refuge with the triple jewel. In the moral rules, or in patience, or in the fruit of a streamwinner. 2. In full enlightenment. So he should exert vigor, and, having made these wholesome roots common to all beings, he dedicates them to the supreme enlightenment. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of patience, acquire the perfection of concentration? The Lord. Here, Subhuti, the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of patience, detached from sense desires, detached from evil and unwholesome dharmas, dwells in the attainment of the first trance, which is with thoughts adjusted and discursive, born of detachment, full of rapture and ease. And so he dwells in all trances up to the fourth and up to the attainment of cessation. All those dharmas which constitute thought and its concomitants, and which are connected with wholesomeness, he dedicates to the knowledge of all modes, but in such a way that on that occasion he does not apprehend the trances or their limbs. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of patience, acquire the perfection of wisdom? The Lord. Having stood in the perfection of patience, the bodhisattva dwells as one who surveys dharmas in their modes as isolated, calm and non-extinct. But he does not realize that dharmahood until he is seated on the terrace of enlightenment, and there wins the knowledge of all modes, immediately thereafter to turn the wheel of dharma. It is thus that the bodhisattva, the great being, having stood in the perfection of patience, acquires the perfection of wisdom, but in such a way that he neither rejects it nor seizes upon it. Subhuti. How does the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of vigor, acquire the perfection of giving? The Lord. Here the bodhisattva, having stood in the perfection of vigor, does not, either in body or thought, lay aside his duties. Without any doubt should I know full enlightenment. Not should I not know it. Firmly established in the perfection of vigor he travels for the sake of beings for 1 mile, 2. Over the distances of hundreds of thousands of kotis of world systems, if only to bring just one single being to enlightenment. If he can find no persons belonging to the bodhisattva vehicle, he will establish a person belonging to the disciple vehicle in discipleship, or one belonging to the pratyekabuddha vehicle in pratyekabuddhahood. One single being even he establishes in the 10 wholesome paths of action. Having given that gift of Dharma, he gratifies beings also with material gifts. He does not, however, dedicate that